What's up? Hello. Good morning. I'm really privileged to be here. I feel very lucky. Thanks for having me. I'm here today to talk about Mind the Backlash. I'm going to talk about how progress is inevitable, and so too is backlash. And if you prepare yourself for backlash, you can actually win out on top. So before I go into it, let me quickly just give you a quick snapshot of who I am. I own and run SYLVAIN Labs, which is an innovation and brand design consultancy. We have office in New York, in Amsterdam, in Richmond, Virginia. We work with a lot of big companies, helping them thinking about their products and their brands. Some things we've done recently, we worked on the brand strategy for Spotify. We're working with BlackRock to help them think about their brand and their purpose. Working with Waze, working with Master Dynamic, which is a line of headphones we created. Working on the WNBA, Airbnb. We work on some stuff. So today, I'm super pumped to be here. I've been thinking about this topic for a long time, and I was so happy when Kat asked me to come and talk about this. And it really starts quite simply with a story. I went to Big Island in Hawaii a few months ago and had an amazing experience. I saw an active volcano for the first time. On a helicopter, I flew around and I saw a volcano just beautifully exploding and lava flowing, and you really saw viscerally the impact of lava on land, how it scorches the land in such a harsh way. It strips it of everything, of all its nutrients. And what's ironic is that immediately after a volcano ravages land, life begins. And life begins so innocently and beautifully and lushly and powerfully, and the cycle continues and nature just thrives. And if you take a step back, which I did, and you looked at the impact of lava, you saw these little buds of plants kind of popping out of nowhere, emerging out of nowhere. And when you look at volcanoes and the impact of volcanoes on societies and cultures, you actually see the violence of a volcano alongside the life and vitality of nature. And actually 1% of the Earth's surface is covered by volcanoes, but that 1% can sustain as much as 10% of the population. And so that to me is just a really interesting story about almost backlash, about how progress and steps back, and that you need steps back to continue to progress. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today. If you take a step back and you look at culture at large, you see we are on a path of progress. You see poverty rates for children are declining. You see high school graduation rates are increasing. You see the public support for same-sex marriage continues to rise. You see teenage pregnancy dramatically on the decline. Serious violent crime also on the decline, in spite of what happened last night. You still see at large crime is decreasing. And of course, the rise of women in every sect of society is completely exploding and changing the status quo. African American poverty rates on the decline. You take a big step back, society's progressing in the right direction, as far as I'm concerned, as far as my politics are concerned. Society's moving in the right direction. But this quote always gives me pause. It always gives me chills. And even right now, as I talk about it, I'm getting chills. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. The idea that progress and the ideal world that we want to achieve is actually a long run. It's actually going to take decades. It's actually going to take hundreds of years to achieve the ideal sense of progress that we are working for today. And when you understand that progress is a long road, you kind of think of every little move, every little action that we make as a baby step to something bigger. And even amazing moments like this, amazing events like this are just one little baby step, part of a bigger story that many of us won't even be alive for. And in fact, Martin Luther King famously said, I may not be there when you get there. And so that's how I think about progress. I think of it as this long arc, and I can prove it to you. I can prove it to you that in the civil rights movement, you had, if you take a step back and you look at the actions and the work that was done during the civil rights movement, it's not unlike what came 30, 40 years later through Black Lives Matter and the response to police brutality throughout the US. Or if you look at the women's liberation movement of the 60s and 70s, and then you think about the Women's March in early 2017, it's kind of eerie to see just how similar those things are. Just how similar those people are and those aspirations and the visions. Yes, they're wearing different clothes. Yes, it's a different time, but but it's a lot of the same actions. Or you look at the Million Mile March, which was against gun violence, and you look now at some children of those same women that marched in 2000 are marching for the same exact thing. Or you look at climate change and the fight for Earth Day 30, 40 years ago, and the fact that we're still hitting the streets making those same arguments. And that's really this point about the long arc, that it's going to take a very, very long time to get there. Now, what's amazing is technology is accelerating all that. It's giving activists and brands that are choosing to stand for public purposes, social purposes, it's accelerating all that work for three reasons, I think. One is the bottom-up narrative control. The idea that with technology, the people on the front line can own the conversation. They can populate culture with content and media in a way that you couldn't do from afar or as a sort of a mainstream brand. Black Lives Matter, many people are suggesting that organization is driving the greater dialogue around police conduct around the country. And remember, this wasn't an organized, yeah, you should clap for that. You should clap for that. It's driving that conversation. And remember, this wasn't necessarily a highly organized, sophisticated organization that spanned the coast. This was a socially driven, bottom-up movement. And through that dialogue, they're controlling the conversation. And the same goes for the Me Too movement. And yes, there's a lot written about Me Too, about what's happening to women when it comes to sexual harassment and discrimination. But there's also a great amount of content that's part of that, that's funneling and fueling culture and making this topic still something that we're talking about today. And it's not something that's fleeting in culture. It's part of who we are and it's here to stay, which is, again, fantastic. Bottom-up control. The second one is about viral human storytelling. So technology is doing something that we always saw in civil action. Rosa Parks, the story of Rosa Parks is a great example of how a great story just sparked a movement and it captured the imagination of the world. You know, this woman who refused to get up and so on. And that sort of idea of these stories are pretty profound and pretty powerful. Could you imagine, you know, Stokely Carmichael had a Twitter feed and could use his amazing oratory skills in social media to really enrapture the culture. The stories are what makes these things viral. The story of Trayvon Martin, the story of Eric Garner, the story of Sandra Bland, which was amazing. You need to understand these people as real people, that with parents, with choices, with heartbeats, for you to get them, and technology is making that possible. What else is technology doing? Real-time mobilization. So the idea that you can wrangle millions of people through technologies is kind of amazing. You know, the Women's March was organized the day after Trump won the presidency. And in less than 2 or 3 months, you had 4.6 million people descend, the biggest march in the history of the United States, descend on Washington, D.C., which is kind of amazing. And it could only have happened because of the power of Facebook groups and social media really mobilizing people in new ways. Or you saw that in Parkland with the shootings, just how quickly technology was the vehicle for that change. So all this is happening quickly. All this progress is happening quickly, accelerated by technology. But as I said, while progress is inevitable, so too is the backlash. And I hope you know what I mean when I talk about backlash. With every great movement we see some counteraction, the use of coercive power to regain lost power as a capacity. It's a punch back. And it, makes me think of hip hop, for sure. It makes me think of, when Dr. Dre came back with his album and he was like, you thought you forgot about Dre? And it was him responding to the backlash. Now, the reason for that backlash is it's primal. It's actually primal. We have a human instinct to fight or flight when we're under attack. So when progress happens and we're putting forward an agenda that threatens someone else's power, the natural instinct is to respond. The pains are felt much greater than the gains. And so as a result, you see the backlash the pendulum swing, sometimes more aggressively, sometimes more violently than it started out with. And of course, Trump is a great example of that, but I'll give you a few other examples of that. It was amazing. The backlash has created a pattern of this kind of one step forward matched by 2 steps back. And the climate change agreement is a great example. We made 1 step forward, but there was this kind of incredible step back where you kind of stood back and you're like, what happened? We were making progress. Or you look at the incredibly hard-fought fight for abortion, and now to think that it's actually under threat, and it is under threat in the bigger sense of things. Or you think about open borders and the fact that now we're taking a step back and talking about walls. Or maybe even the civil rights movement, which in an abstract way feels perfect. It feels ideal. It was everyday people taking control of their destiny and winning the right to vote, and along with many other rights. But what came after the civil rights movement was a violent backlash between the 70s and I would argue 2018. You saw gerrymandering and districting really begin controlling how black people voted in this country. Or you saw the so-called war on drugs and the proliferation of crack cocaine and the criminalization of drugs. And of course the prison industrial system and how that was another way to kind of respond to the progress that African Americans were making in the US. And every aspect of society. The Afro was amazing. The Afro was amazing. I'd be rocking an Afro right now if it was like 1975. The Afro was amazing, but the backlash of the Afro was scary and disturbing. It was the Jerry curl. The Jerry curl, I could do a presentation on the Jerry curl, but the Jerry curl was a violent backlash. Or you look at athleisure and Run DMC and Hammer Time taking it to another very dangerous place. Even from a fashion point of view, it was a little dark. But quite seriously, this hashtag, I think, is an example of a backlash gone wrong. I think Him Too is a weaponized version of Me Too, and it responds to the progress that Me Too was making. So I'm going to quickly go through how backlash has happened. So one is they vilify leadership. Leadership vilification. You think about Martin Luther King and how J. Edgar Hoover attacked Martin Luther King in every aspect of his life, looking for flaws. Or are you looking at how quickly society descended upon Asia Argento and her past to discredit Me Too movement at large? You looked at the leader and you were like, well, she fucked up too, so there's no virtue in actually what you're doing. Or the idea of false equivalencies. This idea of, for example, reverse racism. The idea that affirmative action is nothing but reverse racism. But I love this quote because it suggests that you can't look at affirmative action in absence of the greater legacy and history of racism. And so there is actually no such thing as reverse racism. Or this idea of all lives matter was a response to Black Lives Matter. You also look at this idea of victimhood appropriation, the idea that we too are under attack. We too, you're under attack, we too are under attack. I don't know if you know this story. There's this woman named Anita Bryant who famously in the 1970s got pied in the face. And she used that kind of victimized moment. Now, on the surface, it looks disturbing. It looks like a man who's vilifying a woman in public. But she created this Save Our Children crusade, which was about protecting kids, so to speak, from gay and lesbians, trying to protect against conversion therapies and all that sort of thing. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. And this idea of claiming victimhood is a problem. And we saw it a couple weeks ago. What do you mean? I'm under attack. I'm angry because that's what Brian Kavanaugh said. He said, I'm also under attack. He claimed he stole the victimhood from Dr. Blasey Ford. So this is how it's done. Leadership, vilification, false equivalencies, and victimhood appropriation. Now remember the volcano? Remember what comes with these volcanoes? Remember what comes with the savagery of lava flow is life. New life comes. And I'm going to quickly go through how I like to think about backlash, how to mine the backlash. The first, seduce. Seduce the backlash. Go into a situation, embrace it, know that it's around the corner. And of course, Caitlyn Jenner did this famously, unapologetically on the cover of Vanity Fair and seduced the backlash, brought it in closer to her. Or you think about Subaru in the 90s making the decision to focus on a so-called niche audience and focusing on gay and lesbian or lesbian audiences in particular and knowing that there was a backlash inevitable. 2, stoke the backlash. Unapologetically stoke the backlash. Barbecue Becky, I don't know if everyone knows who this is. It's a great example, BBQ Becky, of taking something in culture and using it for your own purpose and really kind of stoking that fire. Or you think about Ben & Jerry's and Resist, Pecan Resist is the name of this flavor, which again is just kind of stoking that moment, stoking those feelings, making sure that stuff is transparent and ripe and unapologetic and in culture. That's the second one. The third, hijack the backlash. Turn the negative into a positive to rally your base. And I love this example of Elizabeth Warren and how Mitch McConnell, in his categorization of how Elizabeth Warren was speaking, he said, nevertheless, she persisted. And the movement took that phrase, nevertheless, she persisted, to fuel the voice of women in politics and at large. And hashtag nevertheless, she persisted is actually a thing. In the same way, nasty woman is a thing, or the woman card is a thing. And there are brands that do this well too. You know, Honey Maid famously took all these negative tweets in response to an ad they did and created this amazing piece of art. And that's how they mine the backlash. So this is to me how you mine the backlash. You seduce it, you stoke it, you hijack it. Thank you for having me. My name is Alain. I'm not here for the rest of the conference, unfortunately, but please reach out to me if you have any questions or would like to learn more about us. Thanks a lot.